put dancers on roller skates and on the ceiling. He defied the conventions of the musical and often defied gravity too. But whether his characters are on the town or on a stage, he is the great trickster of his trade. His is a world of beautiful images and joyously comical ones. A world of elegance, delight, and charm that has now mostly vanished. He's a romantic, but Stanley Donen is also a realist.
Well, I disagree violently with Jean-Luc Godard when he says, you know, cinema is truth 24 times a second. Cinema is a lie 24 times a second. When I was 9 years old, I saw Flying Down to Rio, and an event was to me like an atom bomb going off inside me, seeing that particular movie, seeing Fred Astaire, seeing musicals, and I practically lived inside the theater where it was playing, and from that moment on, you couldn't get me out of the movie theaters.
He thinks he may have seen the movie 30 or 40 times, for he knew this is what he wanted to do, improve on reality. Eventually, it's what he did do. He was born in Columbia, South Carolina, the child of Russian Jewish immigrants. He was, he says, shy and introverted. It's why he liked to lose himself at the movies. But he did learn to dance, mostly to emulate his idol, Fred Astaire.
I finished my high school education and went to New York to get a job in the theater. My father thought I was insane. I was a 16-year-old little southern boy with a thick southern accent. But lo and behold, it took me about 4 days, and I had a job on Broadway as a dancer in Pal Joey.
Its stars were Gene Kelly and Vivian Segal. Kelly saw that Donen's energy and ambition matched his own. Donen worked as a dancer and as Kelly's assistant choreographer on 2 more shows. It was a means to an end.
So I stayed in New York roughly a year and a half, and when I had enough money to come to Hollywood, I came to Hollywood.
When Kelly went west, Donen followed and helped conceive this number. It was typically Donen, a combination of dance and movie magic.
Why didn't she meet you?
There's the double exposure number, which is sort of the first time that I had ever really directed anything. I suppose I was 17 or 18, and Gene and I had this idea for this double exposure number, and the director of the film didn't think it was possible to do it because there was no such thing as computers or ways to recreate camera movement in those days. There was nothing you could do to time the exact position of the camera and the tilt and the pan and the dolly and so on. The only way they did double exposure in those days was tie the camera off. Well, we couldn't do that and make that number a decent film dance number. But I said, no, we can do it because it's pre-recorded track and dancing is always exactly the same. I'll know exactly where he's going to be on exactly the same instant. And I will be the computer. I didn't know what a computer was, but I'll plan it, so we will recreate the camera moves. And the director said, no, it's impossible. And Harry Cohn said to Gene, do you think that it's right, that this is possible? And he said, yes, I think Stanley can do that. And so we were left to our own devices to do that number. The director went off on holiday, and we did that.
In this, their golden age, movie musicals emphasized their moviness, putting on screen things the stage couldn't do. One midnight, for example, Donen awakened Kelly with a brainstorm. He should do a number with one of the screen's great stars.
So Kelly and I went over to see Walt Disney, where we explained this idea about dancing with Mickey Mouse, and he said, just a second, let me get this straight. You want Mickey Mouse in an MGM picture? And we said, yes, Gene will dance with Mickey Mouse. Wouldn't that be incredible? And he said, Mickey Mouse will not appear in an MGM picture. So that's how Jerry Mouse got the job. We had to know every move that the mouse made, exactly how long it would take and where he was going to be. The camera operator was forever saying to me, "Where is he now? Where is he now?" Because we shot the live action first. And after it was shot, then into the cartoon department where they make pencil sketches and so on, and we had to do it frame by frame, shot by shot. If you ever look at that sequence, you will see that it was danced on a rather glossy floor. Well, we cartooned the mouse, but we neglected to cartoon a reflection of the mouse in the glossy floor, and we put the whole thing together, and it looked like Gene was dancing on the floor and the mouse was pasted onto the front of the screen. So we had to go back and reanimate a new cell for every shot.
Odd, but the man who loves movies because they let him make up such convincing fantasies thinks of himself as a realist.
I feel I'm a very sort of earthy person as far as pictures are concerned. That is to say, I like things that have a basis of simple daily reality rather than the Japanese no play or I like it to seem like it's from America and the roots of America.
For example, On the Town. It was shot partly on location, rare for a musical in 1949. Donnan and Kelly shared director credit.
There are 3 sailors who've been locked on board ship, and there are 3 guys who are randy for 3 girls. And they know they only have 24 hours, and they've got to find these girls. In the naive days of World War II America, we couldn't show them as quite as sexually ravenous.
Manhattan women are all in silk and satin, and so the fellas say. There's just one thing necessary in Manhattan when you got just one day. Gotta pick up a date, maybe 7 or 8 on your way in just one day.
New York, a wonderful town. The Bronx is up and the Battery's down. The people riding all on the ground. New York, it's a wonderful town.
But you do get that feeling. They're all looking for girls.
Hot spots, swag spots, grooves and cellars. 3 smart gals and 3 slick fellas. We're gonna paint it red, fill them up and then take them down. Let's have a ball tonight. We're going all the time.
The thing that I'm sorry about in On the Town, and this is, I don't know how many years later it is, it's over 40 years ago, there's not enough dancing in it to satisfy me, in spite of the fact that we have Gene, Vera Ellen, and Ann Miller, all of them knockout dancers. We still didn't have enough dancing to make me satisfied. I wanted more.
How's this for more? This is Stanley Donen's boyhood dream come true, directing his idol, Fred Astaire. The year was 1951. The film, Royal Wedding.
When music plays, it says to the audience, almost consciously, but certainly subconsciously, listen, this is not real life.
For example, this sequence from Royal Wedding, maybe the most spectacular, certainly the most famous of his movie lives.
Of all the people born to this date on Earth, it seems to me Fred Astaire is probably the only person alive who could dance around the walls and ceiling of a room. So I think that's how I got the idea, really as simple as that. You know, a guy in love feels like he can walk on air, and particularly Fred Astaire. What we did was we had a big wheel like that, which had gears around the edges. We built this room, 4 walls, if you can imagine a room with ceiling and floor, and 4 walls and the backside open. And Fred Astaire can only dance on the floor like any other human. So the camera was on the floor, but the camera never saw outside the walls of the room. So when we wanted him to dance on this wall, we would very slowly turn this entire device until this wall, which now is represented by my hand, became the floor. The camera at that point was over here, where the floor was, but it didn't know, in other words, it couldn't see, because it was not seeing outside the room, that the room had turned. And so it was on the ceiling and the other wall and the floor.
Donnan makes it sound easy. Fred Astaire makes it look easy. But they rehearsed 8 hours a day for 2 weeks.
The way you operate a camera is with your left hand you pan, with your right hand you tilt. Well, that's all true as long as the camera is upright. When the camera's on its side, with your left hand you're now tilting, and with your right hand you're panning. Then when the camera's upside down, the controls are opposite from what your brain remembers. You have to go the opposite way. So the camera operator had to practice just as much as the dancer in order to work the camera. And there was no such thing as a zoom lens in those days. So we did that whole number. There are just 2 shots in it, in the dance part. We fixed the camera, rehearsed it. We shot it in an hour and a half.
The movie musical reached its height here at MGM in the 1940s and 50s. Its innovative center was the Freed Unit, named for producer Arthur Freed, and including among many significant others, writers Betty Comden and Adolph Green, as well as Kelly and Donnan. Naturally, it too was something of a lie.
The Freed Unit, of course, is a myth. You were under contract to MGM just like everybody else was. It was only that Arthur Freed had particular taste and appreciation of things and would collect those people together, and he kept collecting those same people over and over. So they got to be known as the Freed Unit, and the other producers were very envious of people being called that when in fact it didn't exist. There was no Freed Unit, except that we did all keep working for Arthur Freed. So there was a Freed Unit in a way, but it was only in all of our heads.
Singing in the Rain, the Freed Unit, by common consent, the movie musical, reached its peak with this permanent entry on everyone's all-time 10 best list. Like most Freed productions, it was an original, not an adaptation, with Kelly and Donnan co-directing again.
I think it's a realistically based, what I would call a realistically based musical picture in general, but reality is based on insanity, not on everyday reality. On Hollywood insanity, yes. Or to quote Billy Wilder, you can say that Hollywood is all glitter and tinsel, but if you look beneath that, you find more glitter and tinsel. All those characters are outrageous, and therefore they're doing outrageous things because they're outrageous people. Kelly is a stuntman, and Debbie Reynolds is a girl who dances and comes out of a cake. Donald O'Connor plays an outrageous musician, and Jean Hagen is a silent movie actress who has a terrible voice when talkies happen.
Now don't forget, Lena, the mic is on your shoulder, and whatever you say goes through the wire onto the record. Now please, Lena, talk into the mic.
Yeah.
Oh, and don't make any quick jerky movements or you might disconnect it. Okay, let's go. Quiet! 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 Roll 'em!
Oh, Pierre, you shouldn't have come. You were flirting with Daisy.
What's this wire doing here? It's dangerous.
Donald O'Connor and Gene Kelly are best friends. Gene Kelly is despondent because he cannot find the girl that he's in love with. She's disappeared, and he feels he'll never see her again. He doesn't know her name. He doesn't know where to look for her, and he's been looking for her, and Donald wants to cheer him up.
Come on now, snap out of it. You can't let a little thing like this get you down. Why, you're Donald Lockwood, aren't you? And Donald Lockwood's an actor, isn't he? Well, what's the first thing an actor learns? The show must go on.
And in cheering him up, he's going to be a clown. He's going to be a goof. He's going to make him laugh to bring him out of his mood.
My grandpa said, go out and tell him a joke. But give it plenty of hope. Make 'em roar, make 'em scream. Take a fall, but a wall split a seam. You start off by pretending you're a dancer with grace. You wiggle.
He did a lot of funny faces, hitting the wall and smashing into boards. He was a great slapstick comedian, a great physical fall-down, knockabout artist.
Don't you all... What? My dad?
We were in the rehearsal hall trying to figure out what to do, and we said to the property man, listen, they're on a soundstage. We're going to try and be funny, so bring us a lot of props. And the property man said, please, he said, you know the prop building at MGM. It's as big as Macy's department store. You have to be a little more specific. And we said, no. Go to the property department and bring over some things. Just anything, everything. Bring as much as you can. And among the objects that he came over with by chance was that funny little half-broken dummy, which didn't have a head, and part of one arm was missing. All these things were just lying around on the floor, and Donald, one rehearsal day, saw that little funny thing and started flirting with it, and started using it as an object, and then we refined that idea into a part of the number. He could also do that trick of running up the wall and doing the backflip, so we used that trick that he could do. He could do that spinning trick on the floor, so we put that trick in.
Over the years, its signature sequence has become an emblem of an innocent romanticism the movies have lost.
You're a big singing star now, remember? This California dew was just a little heavier than usual tonight.
Really? From where I stand, the sun is shining all over the place.
It seems obvious in retrospect. I remember Gene and me talking to Arthur Freed and saying facetiously, Arthur, we have the most wonderful idea for this Singing in the Rain number for Gene. And he, all aglow, as he always was, saying, really, what is he going to do? What are you going to do with it? He said, well, Gene is going to sing and dance in the rain.
singing in the rain.
Dancing is somehow basically in our minds connected to joy. And in Singing in the Rain, he dances in the rain for joy because he's in love and the girl is in love with him.
Give a Girl a Break, Bob Fosse and Debbie Reynolds. A half-forgotten musical containing the most technically intricate number Donnan ever staged, with the film running forward, then backward in a dizzying, dazzling, often nearly imperceptible pattern. Here's a hint. When the snow seems to be swirling upward, the film is running backward. Bob Fosse, soon to become a great director-choreographer himself, and Stanley Donen formed an enduring friendship in their MGM days.
I always want to make a musical where all the characters dance. I like dancing. I believe it just is the most joyful thing to watch.
Sometimes people resist that joyousness. Seven Brides for Seven Brothers was a backwoods story, and backwoodsmen aren't supposed to be dancers.
Oh! What'd you do that for?
You. All of you falling on the food that way. Haven't you any decency to wait for grace?
Huh?
You don't even know what I'm talking about.
What's the trouble?
Look at your brothers.
Fiddles must be good.
And that was the biggest struggle I had with making the picture, which was casting it with dancers, because the studio was terrified that if I put dancers, particularly in the male roles, that the picture would be a catastrophe. The dancers will float off the screen. You can't make anybody believe that men who chop wood can dance. You can't cast it with dancers. You can't have a choreographer. There will be no dances. There will just be, they wanted to use country songs that were folk songs. They didn't want to have a score. They saw the picture in a completely different way than I did. And that was a gigantic struggle. I think I just won by insisting and never giving up. It was a simple idea because the story was about these seven Pontype brothers who lived in the mountains outside of the little village, and they were nice, strong fellows. And for some reason, which we don't go into, the townspeople and the Pontype brothers don't get along. They don't like each other. And so they come to this barn-raising event where they're thrown in contact with the townspeople. And the townspeople and the Pontype brothers want the same girls. And the way they try to win the girls is to challenge to who can do a better trick. I tried to find somebody who was tremendously gifted in a musical way. The first thing I would do is say to that man or woman, show me in a rehearsal hall the best things you can do. And then they would show me these things, and then I would try and get some idea of how to incorporate the things they do best in a musical number. And this worked because it was about the Pontypes do their trick, and it's better than the townspeople, and therefore they win the pretty girls.
Here's one of Gene Kelly's best tricks. The movie is It's Always Fair Weather.
She likes me so do I.
Gene and I had been looking in every movie for a way of incorporating the roller skates into a musical number for him, because he was a great roller skater. And this one, if you look at how we get him on those roller skates, it's a very complicated piece of writing to have him end up on roller skates outside on the street. We do it by a series of devices. He's being chased by some guys who want to beat him up. He hides in a roller rink, rents some roller skates. They can't find him because he's changed his jacket, and he puts his own jacket back on and forgets to take off his skates and goes back out in the street, forgetting that he has on his roller skates.
Loving elegance and artifice, Donen found himself drawn to the high-key world of high fashion and the people who made its images. This was another realm the movie musical had not visited.
I was always interested and fascinated by photography, and specifically by fashion photography, and even more specifically by Richard Avedon's fashion photography. I was thrilled to have a chance to do a movie which used all of those things that I was so interested in.
Moses, you look fabulous. Stop!
I can't stop. Take the picture.
Stop!
I don't want to stop. I like it. Take the picture. Take the picture.
The picture was planned to be done at MGM, and because MGM couldn't borrow Audrey Hepburn, we eventually talked MGM into letting Paramount borrow everything. But the complication came because Paramount had at that very moment decided they were going to throw their entire resources behind a photographic system which is called VistaVision, which is an absolutely splendid photographic system, but absolutely the antithesis of fashion photography. The idea was to have crystal sharp imagery from foreground to background.
That's great. Now stop! Wonderful!
Well, Vogue magazine pictures were done with 8x10 cameras, which had a very slow lens and hardly any depth of focus, and so the shutter saw blurs where legs moved or dresses moved.
To capture this effect on motion picture film, Donen linked his VistaVision camera optically with a stills camera. It was another neat Stanley trick, something no one else had tried before.
All right, Joe, now here's what I want you to be.
I know. I'm a princess at a ball, and the bird is really Prince Charming, turned into a bird by a wicked sorcerer. But we've decided not to let it spoil the ball, and to go right on dancing as if nothing had happened.
You've outgrown me. All right. I'll give him a kiss. He's your Prince Charming, isn't he? Well, get happy. That's a killer.
And the rest of the picture I tried to make look like a fashion film as well. So Paramount was miserable that I was doing everything that would not promote VistaVision. It was unfortunate, but it was the nature of that picture. It's not that I hate sharp focus, it's that I didn't want it for that movie. And so I had, again, a very big struggle with the company, but you know, I was in Paris and they were in Hollywood, so I did what I did.
That you should care for.
The end of the picture also marked the end of the movie musical as an original form. Thereafter, most of them would be adaptations of Broadway hits. Stanley Donen would apply his basically musical gift to non-musical subjects. Cary Grant became his great new friend and partner. Beginning in 1957, they would make 5 movies together. One of their happiest collaborations was an adaptation of a play, Kind Sir.
I took it to Cary and said, Cary, I have a wonderful idea for a movie for you. And he read it and said, yes, it's wonderful, I'll do it if you can get Ingrid Bergman. And I said, well, that's almost saying that's nothing. I'll never get Ingrid Bergman. He said, well, you can only ask her.
Easier said than done. Her romance with Roberto Rossellini had scandalized America and forced her exile from mainstream movies in the 1950s. Now beginning a comeback, she lived in Rome. A nervous Donnan flew there carrying a brief treatment of his project. But Bergman was so eager to discuss it, she didn't even give him a chance to check into his hotel.
She said, now, I've asked a friend of mine about you, and he says you're very talented. I read a piece about you in Cahiers du Cinéma, which says you're very gifted. Cary says he wants to make the movie. So she said, let me put you at your ease. I don't know what the movie is, but I'm going to make it. So now tell me about it.
Alfred, it might be better if I stayed behind with Anna. She's acting so gay. I know she's depressed. She's not!
The door was open.
That is the moment in the picture where it's either going to work or it isn't. The character played by Ingrid Bergman says to her sister, it's too late for me to have a romance or a relationship with a man of equal stature to me. I'm too old, too rich, and too successful. The men who are able to have relationships with me are either married, disinterested, or boring. And I just know there's no way for me. And she's got her face covered in cold cream, and she's got her hair up, and she looks like hell. And she turns around and she sees the epitome of the man that would be the right partner for her. Well, that can only work if it's Cary Grant. There's not another living soul at that point who could have, when she turned around and looked at him, you would have said, oh yeah, how about him?
Miss Carmen is no stranger to me. I've seen you often on the stage. I'm a fervent admirer.
Why, thank you, kind sir.
You know, I once stayed over an extra day in Liverpool because you were billed to appear and then the performance was canceled.
I'm sorry.
It turned out to be a fortunate delay. I made some money out of it.
I'm glad.
I would have gladly traded the money for the performance.
Would you care to see the performance now? I'll play all the parts.
The two of them were bigger than life, and they were the most romantic adult lovers you can imagine.
I found a play I like. I have decided to do it.
I'm glad.
We are right for each other. We are good for each other, my darling.
We are. Sleep well, my love.
Good night.
Good night, dearest. Now, come on, hang on. Hang on.
Good night.
Good night, dearest.
That movie was made in 1957 when you couldn't put Cary Grant in the same bed with Ingrid Bergman. So I wanted very much to find a way to show them in bed, touching, loving each other, and the thought occurred to me to do these, particularly one of them, this telephone conversation that appeared that they were in bed together and that his hand was almost touching her bottom and that they were embracing and holding hands and so on. It was interesting how we had to shoot it because there was no such thing as a TV monitor yet. We had nothing like that. So I had these two sets built so I could see them both at the same time with my eyes. And we shot both scenes at the same time. We lit both shots and had two cameras going. And I had to see that their timing, and they were actually talking to each other on the phone, but their movements and so on had to be timed live. I couldn't dare shoot one of them and play the sound back. I shot them simultaneously.
In Charade, Donnan brought Grant together with another of his best friends, Audrey Hepburn. She wanted to meet her co-star before they started working together, and the director arranged an intimate dinner in Paris.
It was a warm night, and he came in a light tan gabardine suit, looking like only Cary Grant can look. And as he arrived, Audrey and I were already there, and I said, you obviously know who each other is. However, Audrey Hepburn, Cary Grant. And she said to him, "I'm so nervous." And he said, "Don't be nervous. Sit down at the table, put your hands on the table, palms up like this, and put your head down on the table and breathe." So that's the first words out of his mouth while he sat across the table from her. So she sat down, put her hands like this, put her head down on the table, knocked over the bottle of red wine, and covered him in red wine in this very light tan suit in this restaurant miles away from his hotel. And we had dinner, and Carrie in a suit covered in red wine.
Now what's the trouble?
I'm not hungry anymore. Isn't it glorious? Adam!
It's all right. Come and look.
Hey, you don't look so bad in this light.
So why do you think I brought you here?
I thought maybe you wanted me to see the kind of work the competition was turning out.
Pretty good, huh? I taught them everything they do.
Oh, did they do that kind of thing way back in your day?
Sure. How do you think I got here?
Not allowed to kiss back, huh?
Oh, no. Doctor said it was bad for my thermostat.
He had gone through a number of different kinds of characters, but by 1956 he was thought of as to be the sophisticated man of elegance. And he was very nervous with that mantle. He didn't really like that, and he always wanted to debunk that.
Drip dry.
How often do you go through this little ritual?
Oh, every day the manufacturer recommends it.
I don't believe it.
Oh, yes, it's... Wait a minute. There's a label. Look at the small print. Wearing this suit during washing helps protect its shape.
He was a remarkable man. He was a close friend. He was a good friend. He was a generous friend. He was a loyal friend. And he was great fun to be with. He was amusing. He was just one of my great buddies.
Grant made 5 films with Alfred Hitchcock, too. Charade combines suspense and romance in the master's manner, hence a critical pigeonholing its director resents.
Charade is not an homage to Alfred Hitchcock. I'm a little bit touchy on this subject. The genres are there for all of us, and Hitchcock doesn't own it. And I didn't make Charade as either an homage or trying to compete with him. I simply thought it was a wonderful movie to make. I had recently had my eyes examined, and I was living in London at the time, where the space is cramped, and the way they make you look at an eye chart in London, because they have small rooms, is you read the letters into a mirror, which makes them twice as far from you. And when I saw that mirror, I said, I know what I'm going to do. I'm going to use that mirror and cheat, in a sense. It's a lie. I'm going to project those letters off of the mirror into the man's mouth. In fact, they would not be there, but it made it bizarre and frightening and baroque and somehow weird way, because I was very ill at ease with the plot. And I thought that I had a very weak script. I wasn't happy with it, and I felt that I had to do anything possible to keep the viewer diverted. And we were shooting at night, and it was in England, and it was cold, and I was terrified of how can I shoot this? I was so desperate for something, and I said, what did you say? And he said, oh, I didn't say anything, I was just singing. And it made me laugh so hard that he was so happy that he could be singing, and I was so tortured that I didn't know how to get this on film. I don't think I've ever laughed harder on the set.
Two for the Road had a script designed to calm any director's soul. It's a romantic comedy, but one that shows what happens after boy meets and gets girl.
You love me?
No, dear!
Do you?
Confession's exclusion of the saucer dump.
Do you?
Yeah! Cheat.
Give us a kiss.
A marriage is not a, they lived happily ever after. That's not a true image of a marriage.
Hold your breath, we've got a long way to go.
In Frederic Raphael's script, this couple keeps returning on their vacations to the French roads where they first met. And they keep re-encountering their former and future selves at 5 different times in their increasingly complicated lives.
What we need is a small push.
This romance was edged with worldly rude. It was psychologically, as well as structurally, sophisticated.
Must we dice with death? Since when has this car got only 2 speeds, 110 and stop?
I'll tell you what, do you drive?
I'll tell you what, I'll walk.
Okay, walk.
What it says is that you can have a marriage with difficulties, but which still survives for good reason, that you both want it to survive.
Si vous n'avez pas de passeport, vous pouvez pas passer la frontière, voyons.
No, my passport's in here. Must be in here somewhere. I've got a very important meeting in Rome. I've got to get through. Bitch.
Bastard.
The past is the present, is what we were saying, that you carry your past with you into the present moment so that it has as much weight as the now does.
Here's a steamier, more literally hellish vision of modern romance.
Miss Spencer?
He cooks short orders and thinks long, long thoughts of love he does not speak. He is bedazzled.
I only live to hear your voice.
1 cheeseburger, 1 shanty, 1 portion French fries.
Each time you speak, it's like 1,000 violins playing in the halls of heaven.
One day the devil drops by, offering his usual bad bargain, wishes for souls.
You see, your soul's rather like your appendix. Totally expendable. There was a time when it did have a function, but nowadays the vast majority of people never use it.
Looks a bit complicated.
It's a standard contract. Gives you 7 wishes in accordance with the mystic rules of life. 7 days of the week, 7 deadly sins, 7 seas, 7 brides for 7 brothers. Oh, hello, Stanley.
The stars Peter Cook and Dudley Moore also wrote the outrageous script, not entirely unsympathetic to the devil.
Mrs. Fitch?
Speaking.
Abercrombie here. I work with your husband.
Oh, yes.
I thought you'd like to know that he's just checked in to the Cheeseborough Hotel, Brighton, with his secretary, Fiona. Goodbye.
Hello, yes?
Mrs. Jonathan Phelps?
Yes.
Mrs. Jonathan Phelps of 8 Pewsley Rise, Hounslow, Middlesex?
Yes.
Did I get you out of the bath to answer the phone?
Yes, you did.
Sorry, wrong number. I'm only doing my job.
Your job? Making people miserable.
No, giving them the chance to be happy. It's God's idea.
Don't confuse me with religion.
You see, his theory, and I'm not knocking it, is that in order for people to be really good, they have to make a free choice between good and evil, and choose good. Look, I'm a vital part of his plan. I provide the evil.
What a dreary thing to do. I hope you're proud of yourself.
It was pride that got me into this. I only wanted to be like him and have a few angels adoring me. He didn't see it like that. Pride, he called it. Sin of pride. Flew into a monumental rage, chucked me out of heaven, gave me this miserable job. Just because I wanted to be loved.
I'd no idea. It's a very sad story.
I suppose he had his reasons.
Oh, can't you stop?
It's a compulsion. I'm compelled to. His orders.
Pathetic.
He moves in a very mysterious way, you know.
Listen, you look like a nice fella. Why don't you take off your sword and stay a while? Space is a...
This is the devil incarnated in another way, as a snaky song and dance man. With Stanley Donen back to his first incarnation as a director of musicals. Based on the children's classic Little Prince, this film reunited him with his old friend from MGM days, Bob Fosse.
Listen, you are so lucky that you met me.
He did it as a favor to me, as a friendly gesture. We had been friends then for almost 20 years, intimate friends, and he was about to, although he didn't know it, he knew he was in the running for winning the Academy Award, the Tony Award, and the Emmy Award. And he had a new show in rehearsal when I said to him, I'd like you to do this part and do this big musical number. And he said, I'll do anything for you, but I don't have the time to do that. I'm in the middle of a show, and I've got these other 3 things that I'm having to promote and publicize. I've got a shot at winning all the 3. He said, I'll probably be the only man who can lose all 3 in 1 year. As a matter of fact, he won all 3 that year.
If you would like to leave that inhuman race and take up residence out yonder in space, when you are ready to go traveling on, sit right down upon a snake in the grass. One sting is quite enough to make you happy and free. One sting, and you'll discover how relaxed you can be posthumously. And while you're wandering through the heavenly blue, if you should see the Lord come strolling in view, go up and say you bring him best wishes from his fallen old chum, a snake in the grass. A snake in the grass. A snake in the grass.
He did do it as a favor to me for no pay and for only because we were good friends, and I will never forget him for it, and it is, in my opinion, a wonderful, wonderful sequence.
Full circle. The matinees, in Stanley Donen's case, the obsessions of childhood, would become the subject of a unique film. Affectionate and satirical, Movie recreates his double-feature boyhood, complete with preview.
George C. Scott as the biggest ace of the war. In 0 Hour, war at its best.
Contact. Contact. Switch off. Contact. Contact. Take off. Contact. Contact.
So much killing, Padre. Such senseless killing. Killing and more killing. What's it all getting at?
Death, mostly.
Hardly more than boys, yet a great deal more than men. This is the story of those who gave as good as they got and who gave even more than they had. Fight with them, laugh with them, love with them, and even die with them the death of heroes who will live forever.
Movie is really about Warner Brothers pictures of the 30s. It's a very, very specific, tiny little niche in films that it's satirizing. And we tried to stay very close to what they did.
Dynamite Hands was the B picture.
You gotta run, sweat, spar, punch. You gotta give it and take it and give it. You gotta turn your hands into iron, your body into steel.
You gotta work till fighting's the only thing you think of. Until you're sharp and fast. You can destroy a man in the ring.
When's my first fight?
Tuesday.
Fighting's a bad world. It's full of fast people, fast cars, and fast women.
Oh, you crazy monkey. Don't you know the minute I met you, I lost all interest in women?
The La Chez Maison is proud to present, in her 8th month, Miss Troubles Moran.
The director himself did 2 cameos in Movie. In the first, he introduced the femme fatale Anne Reinking. The pitch-perfect script was by Larry Gelbart and Sheldon Keller.
It's amusing in a theatrical way because we have the same sets in both pictures used in different ways. The same actors appear in both pictures playing different kinds of characters. One picture's in black and white, the other picture's in color. And it's a loving look at those Warner Brothers 1933, say, movies.
It's 30 cents. I can't break a 10, mister.
Don't break it. Enjoy it.
Baxter's Beauties of 1933 was Donan's tribute to the form that had formed him, and ultimately to the first master of the movie musical, Busby Berkeley.
Lead your foot, kill that baby, and give me a big blue behind. No, that keys is gonna go higher. No, more sequence for the mine shaft number. All right, everyone, on your toes. We open in an hour and a half.
In my early life, I didn't like Busby Berkeley movies because I thought the numbers were silly and repetitive and unimaginative. He had one idea, which I thought he ran into the ground. That was my take on it at the age of 16 and 17. But now I think he had a unique idea, which was his particular one, which no one else could do, no one has ever tried to do, and no one could accomplish. And they are remarkable pieces of film.
Celebrating another director, Donan also celebrates the medium they shared and its wondrous ability to transform staid and stodgy reality.
And by the time I made Movie, I loved them.
This tinsel world, no more. I'll take the boy next door.
Hi, kitty.
Busby Berkeley worked from the seat of his pants. I watched him do it, and he made it up on the set because he couldn't make it up until he had everything together. And that is, you know, making movies is in a way rather like choreographing dancing. You can't choreograph on a piece of paper. You've just got to get the dancers there and get them doing it and change it and watch it and do it. And making a movie, you've got to get the people and the camera and the lights and all the things, whatever it is, cars, explosions, dancers, dialogue, jokes, everything together, and then try to make sense of it. You can't do it on the paper. Directing movies is an on-the-spot job. It's a general in the battlefield.
Napoleon was a corporal and he had a tiny frame, but he became the emperor just the same. Oh, nothing is impossible if the goal is to be won. Well, you are impossible if you say it can't be done. Nothing is impossible, though the future may look dim. Nothing is impossible if you tackle it with vim. When Samson was in prison, they felt his hopes were dashed, but fortitude was his and the temple crashed. King George of England thought he'd throw George Washington for a loss, but Washington and the Delaware came across. Oh, nothing is impossible if you work and dig and strive, or else it is possible that you will not stay alive.
After this visit with Stanley Donen, guess what 13 has in store? Clue. It's been called the best movie musical ever made, and it's next. So stay where you are. Yes, Cinema 13 presents Gene Kelly, Debbie Reynolds, and Donald O'Connor in Singin' in the Rain. And you'll see it the 13 way, free from commercial interruptions. And after this glorious MGM musical, see a classic of another kind. Mobile Masterpiece Theater presents Prime Suspect, The Inner Circle. That's tonight at 11:45.
Thank you.